Welcome, deeply curious listeners, to the Deep Dive. You've challenged us to dissect one of the most, compelling and potentially transformative geopolitical propositions of our time.
Absolutely.
And today, we're not just looking at a map, we're peering right into the heart of the Himalayas, those incredible peaks that, for centuries, have inspired awe, spiritual retreat, you name it.
Majestic, really.
But beneath that, a serene facade lies one of the world's most dangerous flashpoints. We're talking about an unresolved border between two nuclear powers, India and China.
Hmm.
And it's historically kept global tensions, frankly, on a knife's edge. This isn't just about lines on a piece of paper. It's about the constant threat of instability that echoes worldwide.
It really does reverberate.
So our deep dive today is into a proposition that, based on the sources you've shared with us, feels like it could fundamentally reshape the 21st century. We're talking about the proposed settlement of the India-China border, specifically that line of actual control, the LAC. And here's where the history gets really striking. Our sources suggest this isn't just a diplomatic win we're talking about. It could be a Nixon's visit to Beijing in 1972. Moment for Asia.
That's a powerful analogy.
Think about that comparison for a second. That historic handshake between Nixon and Mao, it didn't just normalize relations, did it? It dramatically rewired the global chessboard.
Completely changed the game.
Shifted alliances, opened up a whole new era, and a similar rapprochement between India and China, these sources argue, wouldn't necessarily form those rigid old Cold War-style camps this time around.
No, the thinking is different now.
Instead, it could anchor a truly multipolar global order, where power is more distributed and nations can pursue their interests with greater autonomy.
A very different global structure.
So our mission for you today is clear. We're going to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights from the material you've provided us. We want to help you understand not just what a settlement would involve, but why it matters so profoundly right now.
The timing is critical.
Exactly. We'll explore how it could transform economies for billions, how it could redefine geopolitical stability, and what it implies for, literally billions of people. So prepare for an engaging, maybe surprising, and definitely well-informed journey into what our sources are calling a potentially civilizational shift.
And what's immediately compelling here, as you've just highlighted, is that framing this potential settlement as a Nixon-to-China moment really signals its significance. It goes way beyond a typical border dispute.
Much bigger.
It suggests we're talking about something with truly transformational global implications, not just for India and China, but for the fundamental balance of power across the entire world stage.
It's a huge claim.
It is a bold claim, absolutely. And our sources back it up with quite a detailed vision of how this could play out.
Okay, so to really grasp this potential future, we absolutely have to understand the past. We need to dig into the deep-seated historical roots of this, frankly, dangerous divide.
History is key here.
Let's start by digging into the very idea of a border itself. Because what we often think of as these fixed, unchanging lines on a map, that's actually a pretty new concept in the Himalayas.
That's right. For centuries, the Himalayas weren't defined by, razor wire fences or militarized checkpoints like you might imagine today. Our sources describe a much more fluid reality. These were frontiers, not rigid borders in the modern sense.
Frontiers.
Think about Tibet, for instance, in the pre-modern era. It symbolized prosperity, not through isolation, but because it was this vibrant hub of cross-Himalayan trade. You had caravans loaded with wool, tea, salt, silk, moving pretty freely across those high mountain passes. It was minimal friction, really.
It's almost hard to picture now, isn't it? Try to imagine a traveler, maybe leaving a Nepali hamlet, walking for days, maybe weeks, through these winding valleys over high passes.
A different world.
They weren't crossing a nation-state border like we think of it. They were just moving through this in-between space, a sort of transitional zone where allegiance or, ownership wasn't really applied to every ridge or river.
Right. You'd know you'd left the Nepali-seeking areas, sure. But it was only when you arrived at a distinct Tibetan settlement, with its unique culture, its own governance, that you'd really feel you were, somewhere else.
Our transition was gradual, organic.
And this ancient rhythm, this flow of commerce, cultural exchange, pastoral nomadism, that's what defined the region, not these rigid, demarcated lines enforced by some distant central authority. It sounds, almost idyllic compared to today.
It does. And what's fascinating here is how this historical perspective immediately challenges the idea that the current dispute is some ancient, unavoidable reality.
Yeah, it's not baked in.
No. Instead, it highlights that the modern India-China border issue is largely a product of, well, modern statecraft and, crucially, colonial legacies. The whole concept of fixed, precisely surveyed and militarized borders, as we understand them today, that's largely an invention of the 19th and early 20th century imperial powers.
British Raj, primarily. Primarily the British Raj in this context, yes. These European empires, they sought to define and control territories in ways that traditional Himalayan societies simply hadn't. They drew lines on maps and offices, thousands of miles away, often with very little regard for the realities on the ground.
Like the actual communities living there.
Exactly. Existing communities, long-standing cultural links, economic continuities, these were often ignored.
Yeah.
This fundamentally shifts how we should view the current situation. It's a constructed problem, not an inherent one.
And it's these colonial legacies, mixed with these post-colonial hopes and dreams, that really fuel the fire today. It creates this deep clash of narratives that continues to, well, haunt India-China relations.
The narratives are incredibly powerful on both sides.
Let's try to unpack it. Maybe start with Beijing's perspective, as the sources detail it. When the People's Republic of China emerged in 1949, one of its long-standing complaints was that its boundaries with India, especially in the east, had been unfairly drawn by the British Raj.
That's a foundational grievance.
Specifically, they point to the McMahon Line of 1914. This was part of the Simla Convention between British India, Tibet, and China. Beijing saw it as completely illegitimate.
Why illegitimate in their view?
They viewed it as an imperial imposition on a weak Tibet. They argued Tibet didn't have the authority to sign such a treaty, and crucially, it was a convention that China itself never recognized or ratified.
Okay.
So the Chinese narrative consistently emphasizes that these colonial powers just ignored the ground realities, ignored local communities, ignored the cultural links that existed for centuries. They just imposed these arbitrary lines that served imperial interests, not local needs. This is why China claims essentially all of India's state of Arunachal Pradesh as South Tibet. And it's also why they maintain their claim over the Aksai-Chin Plateau in the west, which is strategically vital and which India considers part of its Ladakh region.
So these aren't just abstract historical points, they're active territorial claims based on that narrative of injustice.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with India's perspective, which is rooted in an equally powerful but very different narrative.
Right.
For a newly independent India, under its first prime minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, relations with China carried this immense sense of idealism, of hope.
Post-colonial solidarity.
Exactly. Nehru envisioned India and China standing shoulder to shoulder on the global stage. Leaders of the post-colonial world ushering in an era of Asian solidarity, non-alignment.
A powerful vision.
He believed these two ancient civilizations, finally free from the colonial yoke, could lead a new kind of global order. But this dream, this grand aspiration, it was utterly shattered by the 1962 war.
A huge blow.
From India's point of view, China's attack across the Himalayas was seen as an unprovoked act of aggression, a profound betrayal that just completely undermined those hopes of Asian cooperation and solidarity.
Betrayal is a strong word, but it captures the Indian sentiment.
It does. And India, in turn, considered its inherited borders from the British Raj, including the McMahon Line, as legitimate. They argued these were established facts on the ground.
So accepting the inherited lines.
Yes. For India, dismissing these borders would be like disavowing its own sovereign territorial integrity. So you have this clash, these fundamentally opposing historical interpretations and national identities.
China's narrative of colonial injustice versus India's experience of betrayal and aggression.
Exactly. And that clash has led to decades of mistrust, a really deep wound that's never fully healed. And that makes any border resolution incredibly complex.
So, okay, let's just unpack this a bit more. It sounds like the border dispute isn't just about lines on a map at all. It's a deep-seated conflict of historical interpretation, national identity, post-colonial aspirations, all wrapped up together for both sides.
Exactly right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the dispute isn't merely territorial. You've hit the nail on the head. It's a profound collision. You have China's narrative of colonial injustice, this feeling that it needs to reclaim what it perceives as historically Chinese territories that were, usurped by imperial powers.
And then you have India's experience of what it views as unprovoked betrayal and aggression, something that deeply scarred its post-independent idealism. This history underpins the current mistrust. It makes resolution so complex because it touches the very foundations of their modern national identities, and their historical grievances.
So any concession feels huge.
Precisely. Each side feels deeply wronged.
Yeah.
So any concession, even a minor land swap, can feel like compromising a core principle, not just giving up a piece of territory. This is why even small incidents can become major political flashpoints internally in both countries.
Okay, so after all this history, all these clashing narratives, what we're left with today is the line of actual control, the LAC.
The LAC, yes.
Now, it's not formally recognized as a permanent, demarcated international border by both sides. That's crucial. Its exact alignment is still subject to differing interpretations.
That ambiguity is key.
But the reality is the LAC already functions as the de facto border on the ground, right? It's the line that broadly separates their troops. It dictates their current deployments.
It's the working boundary, essentially. But that ambiguity is precisely what makes it one of the world's most contested and, frankly, perilous frontiers.
Perilous? How so?
Well, our sources really underscore the immense risks involved.
Yeah.
We've seen stark examples of how ambiguous patrol rights, these differing perceptions of where the LAC actually lies, and these undefined zones of control can escalate into deadly confrontations.
You mean like,
Well, the 1962 war is the most dramatic historical example, of course, but much more recently, the 2020 Galwan clash.
right, that was shocking.
It was. Soldiers tragically lost their lives in hand-to-hand combat. It's a stark reminder of the immense human cost and the potential for really rapid escalation that's just inherent in this unresolved situation.
So these aren't just isolated incidents.
They're symptoms. Symptoms of a systemic issue, born from the very nature of this undefined line. The constant presence of troops, often in very close proximity, each operating under their own interpretation of where the line lies. It just creates an inherently unstable environment.
So let me ask you, our listener, what stands out to you about why allowing this ambiguous line to remain undefined continues to be such a perilous situation? For us, looking at these sources, the immense escalation potential is truly chilling.
It really is.
You have India and China, both nuclear powers, each possessing massive standing armies deployed to this incredibly high-altitude, unforgiving terrain.
Some of the toughest terrain on Earth.
Any miscalculation, any accidental transgression, any minor incident along this ambiguous line has not just regional consequences, but potentially global ones.
The ripple effects could be enormous.
The lack of a clear, mutually recognized boundary means that even a routine patrol can be perceived as an incursion. It can spark reactions that are incredibly difficult to de-escalate once they gain momentum.
It's a tinderbox situation in many ways.
The stakes are extraordinarily high. It makes this ambiguous line a constant source of global anxiety. It's truly astonishing that after all this time, decades really, this fundamental issue remains unaddressed.
It is quite remarkable and increasingly dangerous.
Okay, let's shift gears now. Let's move away from the historical tensions and the present dangers, though they're crucial context, to something potentially transformative: the immense economic promise of a settled border.
A very different angle, but just as important.
This isn't just about drawing lines neatly on a map. Our sources suggest it's about unlocking what they call an Asian growth flywheel.
That's the term they use, yes. A powerful image. And to really appreciate the potential here, we need to look at the economic trajectories of these two giants. It's kind of mind-boggling, actually. Think about it. Just 3 decades ago, back in 1990, India and China had strikingly similar economies. Each had a GDP of roughly $300 billion.
Wow, that's similar. I didn't realize it was that close back then.
It was. Now, fast forward to today. China has surged ahead. Its economy is nearly $18 trillion. India is rapidly approaching $5 trillion.
So a huge gap has opened up.
A massive asymmetry in size now, yes. But, and this is the interesting part, counterintuitively perhaps, this divergence actually creates unique and potentially powerful complementarities for a future partnership.
So what does this massive growth asymmetry actually mean for potential economic synergy? It sounds like a challenge, but you're suggesting it's actually an advantage.
Precisely. The asymmetry, while obviously significant, actually lays the groundwork for these powerful complementarities. Think about China, for instance. It now possesses abundant capital, right? Having accumulated vast wealth through decades of export-led growth.
Right, huge foreign reserves.
But its labor costs have risen sharply. And its demographic dividend, that advantage of having a young population, is winding down. That presents challenges for maintaining its manufacturing competitiveness.
Okay, so China needs cheaper labor, potentially.
Or at least ways to manage rising costs. Meanwhile, look at India. It still has a vast, young, and relatively low-cost labor pool. In fact, it's projected to have the world's largest working-age population for decades to come.
Huge demographic potential.
Exactly. alongside an increasingly skilled workforce, especially in sectors like IT, engineering, pharmaceuticals. This creates a really compelling dynamic.
So let me see if I get this. Imagine this as a kind of reverse China plus one strategy.
Go on.
But instead of being driven by, say, Western pressure to diversify supply chains away from China,
Right, the usual narrative.
it's driven by Chinese choice. It's China strategically relocating parts of its manufacturing ecosystem directly into India.
That's a very insightful way to put it.
Yes, we could be talking about sectors like, what, textiles, basic electronics assembly, light manufacturing, maybe even component production.
All of the above.
Mm.
Those labor-intensive industries where China's cost advantage is eroding.
And India's large domestic market, its demographic advantage, that English-speaking workforce, improving infrastructure, it makes it an incredibly attractive destination for Chinese manufacturers looking to optimize costs, find new consumer bases, and maybe hedge against geopolitical risks elsewhere.
It's a potential win-win. China gets to sustain its manufacturing efficiency, diversify its production base. India gets a huge boost in industrialization, job creation, maybe even technological transfer.
It sounds like such a natural fit, economically speaking, but it's been largely untapped until now.
Largely untapped, yes.
Yeah.
Primarily because of the geopolitical friction, the mistrust stemming from the unresolved border.
Okay, so a settled border isn't just a nice diplomatic idea. It's presented as a catalyst for potentially explosive economic growth. And our sources actually try to quantify this, which is fascinating.
They do put some numbers on it.
It would be, as you highlighted, a monumental unlock. Our sources emphasize how this could usher in massive Chinese foreign direct investment FDI into India.
Significant capital flows.
We're talking about major investment into Indian infrastructure projects, roads, ports, power. The development of dedicated industrial parks may be modeled on Chinese successes, and crucial logistics hubs that could really transform India's physical and economic landscape.
It's not just about building things, it's about fundamentally accelerating India's industrialization, its overall growth trajectory, creating millions of jobs in the process.
And for China,
simultaneously, it gives China a strategic hedge against those Western decoupling pressures we talked about. It allows them to diversify their economic interests and partnerships in a way that's mutually beneficial, not just reliant on Western markets or investment destinations. Okay, and beyond FDI, what about markets? The market integration potential is equally compelling. India offers China this alternative, rapidly growing consumer base. It's projected to become the world's largest middle class within the next decade or so.
a huge market right next door.
Exactly. This is crucial diversification for China's export-oriented economy. It provides new avenues for its vast industrial output. Conversely, China offers India a tested, highly successful model of industrial clustering and export-led growth.
A blueprint almost.
A blueprint India could potentially leverage to scale its own manufacturing capabilities much faster, maybe become a global powerhouse in certain sectors.
Together, these synergies, this FDI and market integration, they wouldn't just be incremental changes.
The argument is no, not just incremental. They could generate this powerful Asian growth flywheel that could rival any Western or, say, Japanese-led economic bloc.
Wow.
It's a vision of two massive economies, each bringing its own strengths to the table, combining to create something truly unprecedented in scale and impact. It could profoundly reshape global trade, global supply chains.
Okay, let's talk numbers, because the sources reference a research report with some specific projections. What do they say?
Yes, the numbers from the economic modeling, based on projected growth rates and investment scenarios under a full settlement, they really paint a vivid picture. Let's break them down. First, defense budget savings. Over a 10-year horizon under a full settlement, India could save approximately $4 or $5 billion annually. That totals around $40 billion over a decade.
$40 billion, that's significant.
It is. And China, with its larger military expenditure on that border, could save even more, roughly $6 to $7 billion annually, amounting to about $70 billion over 10 years.
So together, that's over $100 billion freed up.
Over $100 billion, yes, could be redirected from maintaining this tense, militarized border to productive investment. Education, healthcare, infrastructure, R&D, innovation.
That's a tangible peace dividend right there. Almost enough to fund a major national development program in India, for example.
Absolutely. Then consider bilateral trade growth. The baseline for 2025 is projected around $136 billion.
Okay.
Under a full settlement scenario, that bilateral trade could surge to an astonishing $350 billion by 2035.
Wow, more than double in just 10 years.
More than double. And look at Chinese FDI into India. Currently, it's around maybe $2 billion annually, give or take.
Relatively low.
Relatively low, yes.
Er.
That could skyrocket to $25 billion annually. That indicates immense confidence, huge investment in India's growth story.
20 to 25 billion a year, that's game-changing.
It is. And Indian exports to China, currently around a $20 billion baseline, could climb to $100 billion annually.
No, that's a massive rebalancing because the
Yeah.
trade deficit is a huge issue for India right now.
It is. This would give India significant new market access, boost its export economy, help reduce that trade deficit, and create powerful incentives for its domestic industries.
Okay, so trade booms, FDI surges. What about overall GDP growth?
The impact there is also profound, according to the models. Under a full settlement, India could see an average annual GDP growth of maybe plus 6.8% to 7.0%. Compare that to a projected plus 6.0% under the status quo.
So nearly an extra percentage point of growth year on year.
Yes, and China could also see a boost, maybe from around plus 4.5% currently projected, up to plus 5.0, 5.2%.
That extra 1% for India might sound modest, but compounded over a decade.
It translates into trillions of dollars in additional GDP. Trillions. This isn't just abstract economic growth on a spreadsheet.
No, this is real impact.
It's about lifting millions out of poverty, improving living standards, accelerating national development, and fundamentally altering India's position in the global economy at a potentially unprecedented pace. It really highlights the massive opportunity cost of the current stalemate. And, this raises an important question. Beyond these really impressive figures, what are the broader societal and developmental transformations these economic shifts could actually bring to both nations?
Right, beyond the macro numbers.
We're talking about massive job creation, particularly crucial for India's burgeoning youth population, significant technological transfer potentially, skill development across various industries, vastly improved infrastructure that would directly impact the daily lives of citizens in both countries.
Especially in those border regions.
Especially in those historically neglected border regions, yes. The human dividend, the improvement in people's lives could be absolutely immense. Hashtag 2.3. Transforming border states from garrisons to gateways.
And that's a great segue. Because it's not just the national economies that would benefit. This economic transformation would ripple right down to the regional level, profoundly impacting those border states themselves.
Absolutely. The local impact could be huge.
Our sources detail how opening these borders would facilitate far greater South Asia, East Asia connectivity, literally stitching regions together that have been politically and often physically separated for decades.
Indeed. Think about initiatives like the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar corridor, the BCIM corridor.
Right, that's been talked about for years, but stalled.
Stalled for years, exactly. Due to geopolitical friction, lack of trust, the border issue being a major impediment. With a settlement, it could finally become viable. This would create a powerful economic artery, connecting these crucial regions, facilitating trade, opening up new markets for goods and services. Imagine new railway lines, highways, energy pipelines weaving through these historically isolated areas.
And think about what this means for places like Ladakh or Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim in India, and on the Chinese side, Tibet and Xinjiang.
Highly sensitive regions currently.
Exactly. These regions, currently heavily militarized garrisons, places defined by the constant presence of troops, the tension of an unresolved border, they could be transformed.
Into what?
Into vibrant gateways of prosperity, bustling trade hubs. They could restore an older rhythm of commerce, one that existed before modern borders were imposed, where goods and people flowed much more freely across the Himalayas.
Bringing back that historical connectivity.
Yes, bringing economic opportunities and development that have been stifled for decades. The very nature of these regions could shift from being military outposts to being economic engine.
Attracting investment, creating local jobs.
Improving living standards for their populations, absolutely. It's like a return to a more natural, historic state of being for these mountain communities, but turbocharged with a 21st century economic boom.
A fundamental transformation from garrison states to gateway states.
Okay, let's broaden the lens again. Let's turn our attention to the geopolitical implications, because this is where the conversation truly shifts from just regional stability to the fundamental nature of the global order itself.
The strategic dimension.
Our sources suggest that a settled India-China border wouldn't just be a bilateral breakthrough, it would be a fundamental geopolitical reimagination, anchoring, they say, a truly multipolar world.
Now, there's a common misconception out there. You hear it particularly among critics in the West, maybe even within some circles in India too.
Right.
The idea is that any rapprochement, any closer relationship between India and China would inevitably mean New Delhi joining China's camp.
Right, that it forces India to choose a side.
Exactly. This often fuels a very zero-sum narrative.
Hmm.
It views international relations as this constant battle of alliances where one nation's gain must be another's loss.
But the sources push back against that.
Strongly. What's particularly compelling here is how our sources challenge that framing entirely. They argue this would not be an alliance of dependence.
Not China as the senior partner, India as junior.
No. Not one power dictating to the other or India becoming some kind of junior partner. Instead, it's envisioned as a partnership of equals,
Equals based on what?
based on mutual recognition of sovereignty, crucially, and mutual respect for their respective civilizational strengths, their independent paths. Such a relationship, the argument goes, would fundamentally strengthen multipolar stability, rather than tilting the global balance in favor of any single bloc or power,
How would it strengthen it?
by demonstrating that major powers can coexist and cooperate. It's a recognition that both India and China are major civilizational states, major powers capable of pursuing their own interests and building relationships on their own terms. It contributes to a more diversified global power structure, not a bipolar one.
So India actually becomes more independent.
Indeed. The idea is that India, through achieving such a settlement on its own terms, actually solidifies its strategic autonomy. It makes it an even stronger, more independent pole in global affairs. It would demonstrate that nations can resolve long-standing, difficult disputes and build productive relationships without being forced to choose sides in some new Cold War dynamic.
So here's where it gets really interesting for me. If it's not about choosing sides, what kind of global order does this new relationship actually enable? What does it look like in practice? Because this really pushes against the traditional ways we've thought about international alliances for, well, decades. Hashtag tag tag 3.2, defining multipolarity in the 21st century.
It absolutely does. It forces a rethink. Our sources argue that this scenario would require Washington, and indeed the entire world, to recognize that the 21st century is decidedly multipolar.
Decidedly multipolar, that's a strong phrase.
It is. And this isn't just a buzzword. It signifies a fundamental shift in how global power operates. It's moving away from a unipolar moment or even a clear bipolar framework like the old Cold War.
How is this multipolarity different from, say, historical examples like 19th century Europe?
That's a great question. The 19th century concept of Europe was multipolar, yes, but it was often unstable, prone to shifting alliances, secret treaties, and ultimately major power wars. This proposed 21st century multipolarity, however, is envisioned as fundamentally different, more stable, potentially.
What makes it different? What are the key characteristics?
Okay, the key characteristics, as outlined in our sources, are crucial. First, major powers would aim to improve relations with all other major powers simultaneously, or at least manage relationships across the board, not just selectively aligning against perceived adversaries.
So less about forming rigid blocks.
Exactly, creating more of a web of interconnected relationships, which reduces the chance of those hard confrontational blocks forming. Second, engagement would ideally not be zero-sum, meaning one side's gain doesn't automatically have to be another's loss. This moves beyond a purely competitive framework to one where shared benefits, especially economic ones like we just discussed, can be pursued. Cooperation becomes more feasible.
Okay.
And third, strategic autonomy becomes the norm, not the exception. Nations like India, China, perhaps Brazil, South Africa, others would pursue their interests independently, without being forced into rigid blocks or allegiances dictated by a single dominant power like the U.S. or potentially China.
More flexibility.
It fosters a more flexible and adaptable global system, hopefully less prone to deep ideological divides like the Cold War, and maybe more focused on pragmatic cooperation where interests align.
And what about stabilizers? Historical multipolarity was unstable.
Right. Unlike historical multipolar eras, the immense economic interdependence we see today, plus the stark reality of nuclear deterrence, these act as powerful potential stabilizers. They make direct great power conflict far more costly, far more dangerous, and therefore hopefully less likely.
Okay, so connecting this back to the India-China relationship specifically.
Right. If you connect this to the bigger picture, a stable India-China relationship, based on mutual respect and settled borders would effectively weaken that binary U.S.-China Cold War narrative that tends to dominate so much global discourse right now.
It breaks that binary frame.
It helps break it. It would ensure that India emerges not as a Western proxy, not simply as a counterweight to China utilized by others, but as an equal pole in a more balanced global system, capable of forging its own path, maintaining relationships with the U.S., with Russia, with Europe, with China, all simultaneously.
That's a significant reordering of global influence, isn't it? Shifting the center of gravity towards Asia, maybe, but without necessarily creating a single new hegemonic power.
That's precisely the vision articulated in the sources, a more distributed, balanced power structure.
This sounds, I have to say, like almost a dream scenario for global stability. Is that too optimistic?
Well, the potential benefits are certainly framed very positively. Our sources emphasize that by settling the world's longest disputed land border between two nuclear powers,
Just think about that phrase.
they would remove one of the greatest risks of conflict escalation in Asia. That alone, objectively, is a massive global public good. It reduces a constant source of anxiety for the entire international community.
Okay, so de-risking conflict is number one. What else?
Beyond that, the benefits extend significantly to strategic autonomy, particularly for India. A settlement would significantly reduce India's perceived need, or perhaps its actual need, to rely heavily on the U.S., purely for counterbalancing China on its land border.
Freeing up resources and attention.
Exactly. This could allow India to redirect its military focus more strategically, perhaps shifting resources and attention from the northern land border towards maritime security in the Indian Ocean, a critical area for its long-term economic and strategic interests.
And its role in global forums.
It would also likely enhance India's role and influence in multilateral forums like BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO. It allows India to truly assert its independent foreign policy, engage on a broader global stage, rather than being primarily seen through the narrow lens of its rivalry with China.
And this could impact regional groups, too, like in South Asia.
Potentially, yes. It could foster greater Pan-Asian cooperation if this major source of friction is removed, maybe even leading to a more stable SARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, if India can resolve its biggest neighborhood dispute.
Okay, benefits for India seem clear. What about for China?
For China, it also offers crucial advantages. A stable Western land frontier would allow Beijing to concentrate more of its resources and strategic attention on its pressing maritime challenges in the Pacific.
Issues like Taiwan, South China Sea.
Exactly. Those remain major priorities. A settled border with India removes a significant potential second front concern. It would also significantly improve China's credibility internationally.
How so?
By demonstrating it's a major power, willing to resolve complex, long-standing disputes peacefully and through negotiation. It could counter narratives of its purely aggressive or expansionist posturing, showing a commitment to stability, which could resonate globally.
Now, what about the U.S. in this scenario? Does Washington lose out if India and China settle?
The sources argue strongly against a zero-sum view here as well. A multipolar world, they suggest, is not necessarily bad for the U.S.
Why not?
Stable India-China relations mean fewer global flashpoints. That inherently benefits American security interests worldwide by reducing potential crises that could draw the U.S. in.
And economically.
American companies could still thrive in India's rapidly growing market. The potential for U.S.-India trade and investment remains huge, and the U.S.-India strategic partnership could continue to flourish in areas like technology transfer, defense cooperation, intelligence sharing, Indo-Pacific security coordination.
So the partnership continues, just maybe on different terms.
Yes. Even as India pursues greater strategic autonomy and settles its border issue with China, it's about the U.S. adapting to a new global reality, recognizing the validity of multiple centers of power, rather than resisting it through an outdated Cold War mentality. The U.S. can continue to build strong ties with India, while India simultaneously resolves a key dispute with its neighbor. This leads to a more stable Asia overall, which should be a U.S. interest.
This is why that analogy to Nixon's China gambit is so apt, but with a twist, right?
Exactly. As the sources highlight, it is not about pitting one major power against another in some strategic triangle, like Nixon did with China against the Soviet Union.
What is it about then?
Instead, it's about stabilizing the world through mutual recognition, through economic cooperation, and fostering a more genuinely multipolar international system. It's a truly different paradigm for international relations, one that perhaps leverages interdependence rather than solely focusing on competition and containment.
Okay, so we've laid out the history, the huge economic potential, the profound geopolitical shifts. But the big question remains, what does the path forward actually look like? How do we get from this dangerous ambiguity we have now to a concrete agreement that secures all these benefits?
That's the critical implementation question, isn't it? Our sources make it very clear that the time for settlement isn't just ripe, it's becoming urgent. There's a powerful confluence of factors driving this imperative now.
What are they?
First, technology. In today's age of high-resolution satellite imagery, precision GPS surveying, real-time mapping, arguments over ambiguous boundaries based on old maps or different ground perceptions are becoming, as the sources put it, increasingly untenable.
We can actually see where the line is now.
We possess the technological means to accurately define these lines with unprecedented precision, removing much of the practical basis for historical misinterpretations or disputes over where patrols should go. The era of vague, hand-drawn colonial maps is truly over. Technology makes demarcation feasible.
Okay, so technology makes it possible. What else makes it urgent?
Second, the sheer economic necessity. The immense economic opportunities we just discussed, quantified in hundreds of billions in potential trade and investment, underscore the huge cost of not settling.
The opportunity cost.
Exactly. Leaving this border unresolved means leaving billions, potentially trillions of dollars in economic benefits on the table for both nations. Not to mention the missed opportunities for regional development, poverty alleviation for millions of people living near the border. It's a form of economic self-sabotage that neither rising power can really afford in the long run.
Makes sense. And the third factor?
And thirdly, there's a strong strategic imperative. Ending this dispute would significantly reduce military expenditures on both sides, freeing up those precious resources.
We talked about the $100 billion plus peace dividend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Resources that could go into economic growth, human development, broader global engagement, rather than being tied up in this tense, unproductive, and incredibly costly military standoff in extreme high-altitude conditions. Furthermore, it would allow both nations' strategic communities to focus on other pressing challenges, maritime security, technological competition, climate change, rather than perpetually looking over their shoulders at a land border dispute that fundamentally drains resources and attention.
So it boils down to a recognition of reality then. What functionally exists as a de facto border, the LAC, must now be formally acknowledged and agreed upon.
Pretty much. It's about moving from an informal, risky, and economically suboptimal status quo to a formalized, stable, and potentially prosperous future. The costs of inaction, both economic and strategic, are simply becoming too high to ignore any longer. Now, the research report you provided, it outlines 3 distinct scenarios for how this could actually unfold. Each has vastly different implications.
Okay, let's hear them. What's the first one?
Scenario A is simply the status quo, business as usual, basically. This is the grim continuation of what we see today. The ambiguity along the LAC persists.
Meaning more clashes are possible.
Yes, leading to periodic clashes, maybe like the 2020 Galwan incident, maybe worse, with a constant risk of escalation. Military deployments remain high on both sides, tying up those significant resources we mentioned, roughly $12–15 billion annually for India, maybe around $20 billion for China, just for this border.
And economically?
Trade remains limited, often subject to political tensions. And those border states we talked about, they continue to be heavily militarized garrisons, missing out on crucial economic development and connectivity. It's just a perpetual drain on resources and a constant source of regional and global instability.
So essentially, more of the same dangerous and expensive situation. It feels unsustainable.
It does feel increasingly unsustainable. Okay, then scenario B is a partial settlement.
Partial. How would that work?
This would involve maybe sectoral demarcation. For example, maybe they agreed to settle the boundary in the eastern sector first, or the western sector, but leave other parts unresolved. It would likely involve some confidence-building measures, maybe joint patrolling in agreed areas, establishing some disengagement zones.
Any benefits?
Some trade routes might open, offering limited economic benefits. But defense savings would be modest, maybe only 10–15% reduction. And crucially, key flashpoints could remain unresolved in other sectors.
So the underlying tensions would still be there.
Exactly, leaving underlying tensions simmering and the full economic and strategic potential completely untapped. It's a kind of piecemeal approach that avoids the big prize, the comprehensive benefits of a full resolution.
Okay, a step, but maybe not enough. What's the third option?
Right, a halfway house, perhaps. And then we have scenario C, full settlement. This is clearly the preferred option highlighted in our sources.
Full settlement. What's the core idea?
The core idea here is ambitious but clear. convert the line of actual control into the final, recognized international boundary.
Formalize the LAC.
Yes, formalize the LAC, potentially with minor, mutually agreed land swaps to address specific local sensitivities or maybe minor strategic interests on either side. But the fundamental principle is accepting the LAC, with these minor adjustments, as the permanent, legally binding border.
And what would that involve on the ground?
This would have to involve comprehensive disengagement of troops along the entire line, the creation of broad demilitarized zones, maybe several kilometers wide in sensitive areas, and crucially, the opening of multiple trade corridors across the Himalayas.
And security guarantees.
Yes, it's strongly suggested that long-term security guarantees, maybe like a formal non-aggression pact, would be a vital part of this final agreement, something to build deeper trust and ensure the permanence of the peace.
Okay, and remind us of the impact under this full settlement scenario. The numbers again.
Under this full settlement, the economic and defense impacts are truly transformative. We're looking again at those projected defense savings. Over $100 billion combined over a decade. India saving around $40 billion. China saving $70 billion.
Huge savings.
Economically, the gains are immense. Bilateral trade potential could exceed $500 billion within a decade. Chinese FDI into India could surge to that $20–25 billion annually, and India's GDP growth could see that extra 1% bump, compounding into trillions over time.
It's a complete reorientation, isn't it? Moving resources and focus from competition and containment towards cooperative growth.
That's the vision, a fundamental shift.
Those are staggering numbers that really drive home the potential dividend here.
Okay, so how do they actually do it? What are the concrete policy recommendations for achieving this full settlement? Because that's where the rubber really meets the road.
Absolutely. And our sources provide very specific actions, recognizing it needs a multi-pronged approach. Actions for India, actions for China, and actions for both jointly.
Okay, what's recommended for India? For India, the recommendations include, first, clearly signaling readiness for a boundary settlement based on the LAC principle, but without compromising core sovereignty. That messaging is critical for domestic politics. Second, India should proactively prepare a robust domestic narrative. Frame the settlement not as a concession or defeat, but as a peace dividend that directly accelerates economic growth, brings stability, enhances India's global standing, and enables strategic autonomy.
Focus on the positive outcomes.
Exactly. Third, linking the settlement explicitly to greater reciprocal access for Indian exports in Chinese markets is also seen as key, making the economic benefits tangible. And finally, actively building robust infrastructure in its border states now to anticipate and facilitate the transformation into trade hubs. Be ready for the boom.
Okay, makes sense. And for China, what specific steps should Beijing take to make this happen?
For China, the sources suggest, first, publicly acknowledging historical sensitivities in India, particularly regarding the 1962 war and the perception of colonial impositions. This would be a significant gesture to build trust and validate some of India's historical grievances.
A confidence-building measure.
A major one, yes. Second, offering large, attractive FDI packages specifically tied to border stability and joint regional development would be a powerful economic incentive for India. And third, critically, committing to verifiable military disengagement up front as a confidence-building measure would demonstrate good faith and a genuine desire for peace, laying the groundwork for the broader political agreement. Walk the talk on de-escalation.
Okay. And what about joint measures, things both countries need to do together?
Jointly, several critical steps are recommended. First, establishing a joint boundary commission. This would be composed of technical experts from both sides, equipped with modern satellite-based mapping authority to definitively demarcate the agreed border using precise technology. Get the line technically agreed and marked.
Remove the ambiguity.
Precisely. Second, demilitarizing at least 3 key Himalayan passes. The sources suggest maybe Matula, Shipkila, Lipulek as examples, transforming them from potential military flashpoints into active trade routes, maybe even tourism hubs eventually.
Turn swords into plowshares, symbolically.
In a way, yes. Third, drafting and signing a comprehensive non-aggression treaty as an integral part of the final settlement. This provides those long-term security assurances and formalizes their commitment to peaceful coexistence.
Locking in the peace.
Exactly. And finally, creating a joint India-China development fund, maybe $50 billion or more, funded by both, for joint infrastructure projects in the border regions, environmental initiatives in the Himalayas, cultural exchanges, something to foster deep economic interdependence and shared prosperity, making the peace beneficial and durable. Now, this all sounds great on paper, but it raises perhaps the biggest question, the biggest hurdle, really. Given the decades of deep historical mistrust, the potent nationalist sentiments in both countries, the immense political capital invested by leaders in their current stances, what would be the biggest psychological and political hurdles for both leaderships in actually committing to such a comprehensive, full settlement?
Yeah, that's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
It would require immense political courage, a willingness to fundamentally transcend decades of entrenched narratives, and potentially face significant domestic backlash. That's a huge ask.
It really is. For India, thinking about it, a major hurdle would be overcoming that pervasive narrative of betrayal stemming from 1962. Plus, the very strong nationalist sentiments that view almost any territorial adjustment, even a swap, as a compromise of sacred sovereignty.
The not 1 inch of land argument.
Exactly. The ruling party, whoever it is, would need to very carefully manage public perception, frame it relentlessly as that peace dividend, unlocking unprecedented economic growth, ensuring stability, enabling true strategic autonomy rather than letting it be painted as a concession or a loss.
And engaging the border populations.
Absolutely. There's also the challenge of integrating the border population, particularly in sensitive areas like Arunachal Pradesh, into this new narrative, ensuring they see and feel the direct economic benefits quickly.
And for China, what are the hurdles there?
For China, the Communist Party's legitimacy is partly tied to its narrative of national rejuvenation, restoring China's historical greatness, and crucially, territorial integrity, especially reclaiming perceived lost territories.
So acknowledging Indian sensitivities is tricky.
Publicly acknowledging historical sensitivities on the Indian side, as recommended, could be perceived internally as weakening their long-held stance, potentially undermining that narrative. It's a delicate balance.
And formalizing the LAC.
Furthermore, agreeing to formally recognize the LAC as the border, even with minor swaps, could be viewed by some hardliners within the party or the military as effectively ceding claims in regions like Aksai Chin or Arunachal Pradesh areas consistently depicted as historically Chinese in their maps and education.
So both leaderships face internal challenges.
Immense internal challenges. Both leaderships would need to engage in incredibly sophisticated domestic political maneuvering. They'd have to carefully curate public messaging, probably emphasize the economic benefits massively, and demonstrate tangible gains to justify such a monumental shift to their populations, and importantly, to powerful internal factions, including their own militaries.
It's not just a diplomatic negotiation across a table.
Not at all. It's a masterclass in political persuasion, risk management, and vision casting, both internally and externally. The scale of this challenge is precisely why achieving such a settlement would be truly historic, truly a civilizational shift. It requires overcoming enormous inertia and deeply ingrained suspicion. #outro seller. So what we've really explored today is something far more than just a typical diplomatic breakthrough. The sources you've shared with us strongly suggest that an India-China border settlement would truly be a civilizational shift, a shift towards peace and prosperity on a potentially global scale.
It's a profound vision.
It's a vision where the Himalayas, instead of being this dangerous divide, this flashpoint, actually become a bridge of commerce, of cooperation, restoring an ancient rhythm of exchange, but for a modern, interconnected age.
And just to recap the immense potential benefits we've discussed, for India, we're talking accelerated industrialization, massive FDI inflows, enhanced strategic autonomy, and a significant boost to its global standing and influence.
A stronger, more independent India.
For China, it offers crucial labor cost optimization through relocating manufacturing, access to a vast new consumer market in India, potentially a new strategic partner rather than just a rival, and greater stability on its sensitive western frontier, allowing it to focus resources on other geopolitical priorities, like the Pacific.
And for the rest of the world.
And for the world, including the United States, it implies significantly reduced global tensions, fewer dangerous flashpoints in a critically important region, and greater opportunities within a truly multipolar system, a system that could be more resilient, more balanced, and perhaps more stable than a purely bipolar confrontation.
That powerful statement from our sources really resonates, doesn't it? India and China getting along is not a threat. It is a global public good.
It cuts through the zero-sum thinking.
It really does. It's about moving from a past defined by, colonial map-making and Cold War mistrust towards a future where these two ancient civilizations, representing over a third of all humanity, choose partnership over rivalry, driven by pragmatic economic incentives, yes, but also maybe a shared vision of Asian prosperity.
It's a testament, perhaps, to the idea that even the deepest, most complex historical grievances can potentially be overcome for a greater common good if the will and the vision are there.
So if 1972 was Nixon's China moment, fundamentally altering the Cold War, then the sources suggest this decade, maybe 2025, 2030, could be remembered as India's China moment,
A defining moment for the 21st century.
the beginning of a post-frontier Asia, maybe, where two ancient civilizations choose partnership over rivalry, setting the entire world on a potentially new, more cooperative, more multipolar trajectory. What will you, our listener, remember about this moment as this profound potential shift perhaps begins to unfold? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into a truly pivotal and maybe hopeful geopolitical proposition. We hope you feel well informed, maybe a little surprised by the profound implications, and have plenty to mull over.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep digging deeper.